I've asked Dan Reed, who is the regional representative for the NRA, to put together a panel of 3. Then we will have a panel of proponents after that. The reason for that is that the governor of Oregon is going to be part of that panel, and because of his time restraints, we have to work around when we can get him in, and he hopes to be here close to 8:30. And there will be some Q&A there. We have some flexibility for those 3 panels to take a little bit more time. Because we have so many individuals that want to testify, and as well as having as many people may have testified previously last session, specifically on a very similar bill, we will then basically have everyone coming up in panels of 3. I will try to call up the panels one at a time, and then give the next individual panel headway to make their way to the room if they're not in the room already. And we are limiting, again, as I said, testimony for 2 minutes. We do have a little clock here that will be giving basically the color code green for speaking at 30 seconds before it will go to yellow, and then at the conclusion of 2 minutes it will go red, and we ask you to wrap up extremely quickly after that so we can get other individuals before us to speak. Others, let's see, we will be alternating between pros and cons on the issues, so we're going to try to keep it balanced as to the number of people from each side that will be able to testify. We will be blending into the panels those who have traveled over 100 miles as well as those within 100 miles because we have such a short period of time. There will not be a Q&A between the panel and the speakers during the public hearing portion because we want to ensure that we receive as much testimony as we can. Please understand that with the invited panels there will be some Q&A, possible Q&A at that time, but to get as many of the general public to speak, we have decided that it would not be appropriate to enter into a Q&A at this time. Written testimony is accepted today and will be accepted through next week until we have a work session on the bill. And so if you are not able to give your oral testimony, or even if you do have oral testimony, you can always supplement it with written testimony. What we ask is you not come forward if you have written testimony and try to read it in the record, because it will be part of the record, and what we can do is we'd rather have you speak from the heart as to your feelings about the issue without reading it, trying to read it in the record, because you're probably not going to finish it within the 2 minutes anyway. If your position has already been stated by a previous speaker, you can acknowledge that by saying, I agree with the previous comments, of supporting or opposing with some comments. Again, this will hopefully allow us to get more people before us. So with that, I want to thank you very much again for being here, and we're going to go ahead and start. The first of the invited panels will be from the state police. I believe Patricia Whitfield is here. Ms. Whitfield, if you'd be so kind to come forward. Yeah, and as she's coming forward, we're getting her there. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and have Mr. Taylor, Bill Taylor is one of our administrators, to go over the framework of what the bill is, what is intended with the bill, and other perspectives. Bill?
Chair, members of the committee, Senate Bill 1551 comes to you from the Senate Judiciary Committee. It requires a person transferring a firearm to another person in private sale, a transfer whether it's a gun show or outside a gun show, to do a background check on the person which they're selling the firearm. Okay. It sets forth exemptions that apply both to sales, private sales in a gun shop, gun show, or outside a gun show, as it relates to transfers between family members, Mr. Chairman of the committee. It sets forth penalties, a graduated series of penalties for people who do not do that and do it repeatedly. It graduates up. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, 2 things I'd like to address. We've had in our office, like probably all of you have had too, hundreds of emails. There's been some consistent issues that have been raised. One goes to the constitutionality of the bill, and the other goes to transfer when someone loans a weapon to someone. And we've just received an opinion from Legislative Counsel's office that Senator Ferrioli requested. I think we would probably want to introduce this into the record. But let me address the first issue. Senate Bill 1551 is just an extension to the current requirement for sale of firearms at gun shows. This provision fits directly into that. Where a person, not a dealer of firearms, sells a firearm to another person, it would simply complete the circle for background checks for all sales. It is an amendment to the same statutory framework. The Oregon Supreme Court, as the United States Supreme Court, has made it clear the right to bear arms is a constitutional right, but it is not an absolute right. Our court said this as recently as August of 2015 in Oregon v. Christian. From the court, quote, because the right to bear arms is not absolute, our court, Article 1, Section 27 decisions reflect a judicial recognition that the legislature has wide latitude to enact specific regulations restricting the possession and use of weapons to promote public safety. Mr. Chair, it's my opinion, as it is the Legislative Counsel's office, that Senate Bill 1551 is constitutional, in that it represents a reasonable restriction on the right to bear arms. The purpose is to prevent felons from possessing firearms. The Oregon Supreme Court has found such a prohibition on felons possessing firearms to be constitutional. Although a background check or inconvenience, it appears to be a reasonable restriction on the right to bear firearms by preventing felons possessing. In fact, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, as you have mentioned, similar laws have been in effect in the state for well over 20 years. I could not find any court opinions or appellate decisions in which that issue has been challenged. Chair, members of the committee, as the other issue, the borrowing of firearms for the purpose of shooting at a firing range or hunting. The chair, members of the committee, this is basically a property rights issue. Okay? The way I read current statute of transfer, and if you look at 166-470, it even talks about temporary transfer to kids for the purposes of hunting. There needs to be a transfer of property interest in the gun from one person to another. We've even tightened that up in the language by defining specifically what a transfer is. It's a sale, it's a lease, it's a gift. It's not a temporary transfer. And if I may, let me cite this opinion today given on February 5th. Yesterday, Senator Ferrioli, he was asked this office to determine the amendment to Section 1 will require a criminal background check before transferring a firearm in various factual scenarios. We think that in the context of going on a short hunting trip with a friend, the court would find the borrowing of a firearm would not constitute a transfer under this provision, Mr. Chairman. In the scenario of loaning a firearm to a friend for an entire hunting season, we cannot point to a bright line. And I think that's true, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. This would be factual. It would depend on the facts and circumstances. The court would like to use when deciding whether a criminal background check is required. The court would need to look at the facts and circumstances surrounding the loan on a case-by-case basis. In the scenario of a person loaning a firearm to a non-relative for an indeterminate period of time, we think the court would like to view this as a gift, Mr. Chairman. So this is a facts and circumstances test, Mr. Chairman. So once again, going to the issue of a transfer, I think this borrowing as opposed to a sale or lease, this would be a very good guideline for everyone to follow.
All right, well, thank you. With that, we're going to go ahead and start with our testimony. First, I'll say we'll incorporate as part of the record the opinion that has just been given to us by Senator Ferrioli that came from our Legislative Council, dated February 5th this year, the interpretation of Senate Bill 1551. Ms. Whitfield, thank you very much for being here.
Mr. Chair, first, I'm a little confused because it goes on to say that if it's determined to be a gift, it would require a background check.
That's correct.
So if I loan my girlfriend, because I'm not married, a gun, and I don't do a background check, then I'm in violation.
Senator Cruz, I disagree with what the opinion just said. It's not that. It's not the point of... it's the intent of if someone is actually taking the possession and ownership to the level of transferring it. It's not in the sense of letting someone borrow the weapon for a hunting trip. In fact, Mr. Taylor went through that in his scenario as to what was presented to Legislative Council on the first page.
I understand, Mr. Chair, but if I give my girlfriend a gun without a specific time frame and it could be indefinite, then it would require a background check.
Possibly. All right, so let's move forward with the testimony from Ms. Whitfield. Ms. Whitfield, the questions that I had posed or had posed to the state police is that we were looking for some general data regarding the background check program for the years 2012 and 2013, since they were the most recent years that you have data. My understanding is that you have information as to specifically the number of approvals and the denials based on criminal history of eligibility. Could you please provide us with that information?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Chair President of the committee, I'm Patricia Whitfield, Oregon State Police Criminal Justice Information Services Division. For the year 2012, the Firearms Background Check Unit processed a total of 256,988 approvals and 2,525 denied transactions. In 2013, we approved 261,132 and denied 2,151 transactions.
All right. And there's also been questions raised as to the reliability of the system and how it works. Could you give us the data on that?
Reliability, Senator Prozanski, in terms of availability of the system. Yes. We maintain a Firearms InstaCheck application within Oregon State Police, and that is dependent on the FBI NCIC law enforcement data system and the FBI National InstaCheck system. The LED's National InstaCheck system, or firearms system for the NICS and the NCIC have all reported that their availability for their systems was 99% or higher for 2013. And the Oregon State Police application, Firearms InstaCheck, we don't keep a track record of that, but we know that there were approximately 9 hours of downtime collectively in 2013. Primarily, the downtime was 3 minutes or 4 minutes, but we do know that there was one day that we had a server failure, and that brought our system down for 7 hours in 2013.
And then there's been questions regarding how the agency, when it receives the information to do the background check, regarding retention of the records. I understand that you have some information as to what the process and procedure is based on a background check being successful versus where there may be some questions that need to go further into investigation. Can you provide us with that information?
Yes, Chair Prozanski, members of the committee. By statute, we are allowed to retain the information for up to 5 years for all of the transactions. We are currently maintaining for any denied transaction up to 5 years the information obtained for that background check. If an approval is given, we are retaining that information for 10 days in order for us to do our billing transactions that might be applicable and quality assurance checks. After 10 days, that information is purged. The exception to that is if the person is ultimately approved, but before that approval, the initial check indicated there was a potential prohibitor that we needed to do further research for. When we do that research and it's from another state or there is not the availability for us to update the Oregon criminal history, we do retain that information for the up to 5 year period because the person might want to purchase again, and we would want to have that information so we don't have to go through that research again.
All right. Let me ask you, is there other information that you wanted to provide us from the unit?
Just in general?
Yes.
Just the overall information that approximately, and the trend is very consistent, 3 to 5 or 6% of the transactions that we get in any given period will be pended due to information that's not complete, so we can't make a true instant check within 30 minutes that the statute allows. So those we put into a pen situation. I know that that's very important for folks, and it's a lot of work for us, but it's important to know that the majority of the checks are done, in fact, instantly. but it's the pending transactions that I think is important for folks to know that we're busy working to get that information, and then when we do have that, we're going to update the record so that we can have that available if there's a subsequent purchase.
All right. So if a sale goes through with no problems, no flags, basically within 10 days, those records are purged, meaning they're no longer in existence?
Senator Prozanski, correct.
All right. Any questions from the panel? Senator Close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Whitfield, on January 28th, I sent you an email. I asked you how many people who have applied and failed a firearm background check in Oregon for the years 2012 and 13, which you gave me. Then I asked you how many of those failed background checks were prosecuted. You told me that there was an Oregon statute that prohibits you from sharing information obtained from these checks for any purpose outside of the background check process itself. So am I reading you correctly that you did not give me that information about how many of these were prosecuted?
Chair Prozanski, Senator Close, that's correct. We don't know how many are prosecuted, but we do, as part of the process, we're required to report any denied transactions to the National InstaCheck system at the FBI, and they in turn notify the ATF. The ATF regulates firearms nationwide. That is our process for those, and I don't have any information about the number of prosecutions. That's correct.
Follow-up.
Yes.
Would you agree that that might be important information for the state police to know in Oregon?
Senator Prozanski, Senator Close, it's very much of interest to us, but the prosecution is not a part of what our process is within the Firearms InstaCheck, so I'm sorry, I don't have that information.
Thank you.
So following up on Senator Close, it sounds like we, the legislature, may need to look at this issue as to changing a statute, because it sounds to me at this point you're prohibited from sharing that information with local or even other state police for the purpose of following up on the attempt to purchase where someone may be denied.
Senator Prozanski and members of the committee, yes. It's our understanding that 166412 does not give OSP the authority to act on those denials. We are to conduct the background check and provide the approval or the denial.
But not share that with any local law enforcement or with other state police units that would be in the enforcement side.
That's correct.
All right. Any other questions? Senator Dembrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Whitfield, what happens if a weapon for which a background check has been requested turns out to have been stolen? Is that something that is part of the system, and what are the next steps?
Chair Prozanski, Senator Dembrow, the statute 166412 that places us in charge of the background check does require a stolen gun check, and members of the public can at any time contact our office to determine if a gun that they might be considering transferring is stolen. When that's stolen, and when we do the check and we find that there's a potential match, we will report that to law enforcement.
But that's an area where you are able to contact law enforcement, and that would be local law enforcement, or?
Chair Prozanski, Senator Dembrow, we are contacting the State Police Dispatch Center, and they determine the appropriate local law enforcement.
Senator Rowland.
Thank you, Chair Prozanski. Follow up on that question. Do we keep track of any of those, whether they've been prosecuted or the gun has been recovered for, and how many there were?
Chair Prozanski, Senator Rowland, no, we do not. We don't have a mechanism to follow up on those.
Do we know how many of those have come up during a background check?
How many stolen gun checks? Yes. Excuse me for looking at my notes here. For 2012, we did 13,421 stolen gun checks in addition to the background check itself. There were 117 hits to stolen firearms. In 2013, we did 17,116 stolen gun checks, of which there were 99.
Thank you. All right, any other questions? Thank you very much for coming forward. I see the governor has arrived. Governor Kitzhaber is going to be part of our next panel. I believe we also have with him Mark Kelly and I believe Chief Henderson.
Mr. Prozanski, I must protest to this testimony from Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly is not a resident of the state of Oregon.
Sir.
Mark Kelly is not a resident of the state of Oregon.
Sir.
Is he relevant to this issue?
So you need to sit down. If you want to say part of our process, I understand your concern, but as we said, we're not trying to have disruptions. Governor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, for the record, John Kitzhaber, Governor of the State of Oregon. I want to commend the Judiciary Committee for holding this hearing to take steps to control gun violence in our communities. I particularly appreciate the fact that you're focusing on reasonable common sense measures to promote public safety and to move Oregon in the right direction. It's also an honor to be here today with Captain Mark Kelly, who has been a champion on this issue at the national level. I'm going to be very, very brief this morning. I had the opportunity to testify on a package of bills that contained the concept in Senate Bill 1551 earlier last year. So let me say, first of all, that I think it's clear that this one bill or any package of bills can completely erase gun violence from our community. But I think this is a reasonable step that shows that Oregon is serious about moving forward. I am very much in support of this bill. It essentially simply expands criminal background checks to ensure that guns do not fall into the wrong hands. Criminal background checks have proven to be a reasonable and effective method to move us in that direction. As you know, if you buy a gun at a store through a gun sale, you're required to undergo a criminal background check to ensure that you're not a felon or someone else who is not allowed to carry a firearm. And this would simply expand that to private sales to people who are outside your immediate family. I hope that this bill passes. I hope that it gets 16 votes on the floor. I also recognize that this is an issue that creates very emotional responses on people on both sides of this question. So I hope that today, and if this should come to the Senate floor, that the debate focuses on the public policy question involved and not the politics. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
Thank you, Chairman Prozanski, Vice Chair Close, Senator Dembrow, Senator Cruz, Senator Roblin, for welcoming me here today. I'm honored to share my perspective on this important debate.
I'll need you to put your name on the record, please.
Mark Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Gabby and I have been watching and reading about the work being done here in Oregon, and I wanted to come today to join your fellow Oregonians, our fellow Americans, in saying it's too dangerous to wait. Arizona and Oregon share a lot. A Western spirit, a way of life grounded in our families and communities, and an abiding appreciation for our traditions of hunting and gun ownership. Recently, we've come to share more tragic experiences with gun violence. In Tucson, Arizona, a madman shot my wife, Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords, through the head before proceeding to murder 6 and wound 12 others. Here in Oregon, you've seen mass shootings as well. The year before the Columbine massacre, Kip Kinkle killed 2 and wounded 22 others at Thurston High School. And just 3 days before the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary, a shooter turned Clackamas Town Center into a place of terror and carnage. The people of Oregon have responded. 78% say they support expanding background checks on gun purchases. Over 1,200 Oregonians have signed Gabby's petition calling for expanding criminal background checks. Hundreds more are calling their state senators, asking that elected officials stand with the people they represent. But let's pause and remember who is not among the 78% of your constituents who want stronger gun laws. In 2010, 36 people were murdered with guns in Oregon. They no longer have a voice. Too often, gun safety and gun rights are pitted against each other. But the truth is this: the thing we can do to promote responsible gun ownership and protect our Second Amendment rights is the very same thing that will do the most to reduce gun violence. And that is keeping guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them by providing background checks for gun purchases. Take it from two gun owners. Gabby's a gun owner and I'm a gun owner. We have our firearms for the same reasons millions of Americans just like us have guns: to defend ourselves and to go hunting or target shooting, or just to collect and appreciate firearms for what they are, part of our national heritage. We believe wholly and completely in the Second Amendment and that it extends to all law-abiding Americans the right to own a firearm for whatever purpose they choose. We take that right very seriously, and we would never, ever give it up. Just like Gabby would never relinquish her gun, and I would never relinquish mine. But rights demand responsibility. And this right should not extend to criminals. It should not extend to the dangerously mentally ill, and it should not extend to domestic abusers and those who perpetrate violence against women. When dangerous people get guns, we are all vulnerable. At the movies, at church, conducting our everyday business, and time after time at a school, on our campuses, and even in our children's classrooms. 2014 has just started, and it has been no different. Since celebrating the new year, America has seen almost a school shooting every other day. We are all vulnerable, just like Gabby and her constituents were at that Safeway in Tucson. Vulnerable like shoppers at the Clackamas Town Center. Vulnerable like the kids at Thurston High School. That's why passing SB 1551 into law is so important. It will make your family safer by keeping guns out of the hands of criminals, the dangerously mentally ill, and domestic abusers. It's common sense. But the evidence makes the case for background checks as well. Residents of the 14 states that have expanded background checks beyond the federal standard are safer. Compared to the rest of the country, here are some statistics. Gun trafficking in these states is 48% lower. The rate at which women are killed with a gun by an intimate partner is 38% lower, while, by the way, the rate at which they're killed by other means is exactly the same. And the gun suicide rate, that rate is 49% lower. Now, this law, like any other law, will not be perfect. Law enforcement will not be able to police every single transaction. Some criminals are still going to get guns. There will still be gun violence. But this law will allow responsible gun owners to make sure their guns don't end up in the hands of criminals. It will give law enforcement a critical tool to fight gun trafficking and gun violence. It will make it more difficult for criminals to get guns. And most importantly, it's going to save lives. Maybe the life of somebody you know. All without infringing on the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding Oregonians. As a Westerner, a combat veteran, a gun owner, and the son of two cops, I think I understand why 78% of Oregon residents support expanded background checks. It's because, like Gabby and me, most Oregonians are pro-gun ownership, but they're also anti-gun violence. Now, you have a special chance to uphold your tradition of gun ownership and make your communities safer for your families at the same time. As a legislature, you have the opportunity to put aside the divisiveness of special interest politics and enact legislation that the vast majority of the state supports. So please support SB 1551. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Henderson.
Chair Prozanski, members of the committee, good morning. Thank you. For the record, my name is Donna Henderson. I'm an Assistant Chief of Investigations for the Portland Police Bureau. I have been with the Bureau for over 25 years, and in my career I've investigated my fair share of crimes that involved guns. I would like to thank Chair Prozanski for the invitation to testify in support of Senate Bill 1551. Chief Reese would have liked to have been here today, but he's away on a work assignment. I understand that the City of Portland has already submitted written testimony, so I'm going to keep my comments brief. My role here today is to offer my perspective as a police officer and an assistant chief. The Portland Police Bureau is the largest public safety organization in the state. We have approximately 950 officers plus reserve officers. Too often as police officers, we have to respond to tragedies when firearms are used illegally or irresponsibly in our community. You can just look at the news every night to see what I'm talking about. Police officers deal with people who find ways to circumvent our laws. In this case, the background check law was established to try to keep firearms out of the hands of felons, domestic abusers, and individuals with serious mental illness. But the law contains a significant loophole with regards to transactions between private parties. I'm hoping today that you will be closing that loophole. Most of the individuals we encounter who carry firearms are responsible gun owners, and nothing in this law threatens their ability to continue to carry. Let me also state that in closing this loophole will not solve all the problems associated with gun violence, but it will strengthen the existing background check system and will assist me and my officers in keeping the community safe. Once again, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Any questions for this panel?
Mr. Chair.
Senator Close.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly, I want you to know we appreciate you being here. We're truly sorry for the tragedy that your family has gone through. As elected people, I think those of us on this panel take that very seriously because your wife was an elected person. So I appreciate what you're trying to do. Concerning the 78% of Oregon residents that you quote, our emails are running far above that figure for and against this bill, and they're running against the bill. That's the emails that we're receiving. So we're trying to be careful in what we pass. I have to ask you this question because I think it's important. In Arizona, when your wife was shot, did the shooter had he passed a background check?
Senator Close, Chair Prozanski, to answer your question, Senator, yes, he did. But if there were changes in the law in Arizona, he shouldn't have. There was evidence, there was clear evidence that he was mentally ill. He hadn't been adjudicated mentally ill. But the community college he attended let him go, expelled him for, a serious mental illness problem. He wasn't offered any treatment. He wasn't evaluated. If he had been evaluated and deemed mentally ill, and then if Arizona would have shared that information with the National Instant Criminal Background Check system, possibly he would not have passed a background check. Now, here's part of the problem, though. So he went to a sporting goods store where he passed a background check. Let's just say he had been adjudicated mentally ill, and that system was shared with the federal government. He would have failed the background check in the sporting goods store. But what would he have done then? In Arizona, unlike Oregon, in Arizona he'd go to a gun show. Likely. I mean, that would likely happen. If this same scenario happened here in Oregon, I suppose a similar person would go to the internet to get around the background check loophole. But in the case, of Jared Loeffner, yes, he passed a background check. Now, there was also evidence that the U.S. Army had, strong evidence. He self-admitted that he was a drug user. That information in a better system could have been shared with the federal government as well, but it was not.
Thank you.
Just a quick follow-up. I want to deal with reality, not what might have happened if something had happened. But you bring up a really good issue, and that is that he clearly had mental health problems, but he had not been adjudicated, so you're dealing with HIPAA-protected information. How do you solve that conundrum?
Well, I don't think HIPAA does not protect somebody who has been adjudicated mentally ill from that information to get.
But if they have not been adjudicated, even if they're in treatment, that's HIPAA-protected information.
Right? So if, in this case, though, with the community college, what could have happened is he could have, they could have recommended a place where he goes to be evaluated. He was never evaluated by a physician for his mental illness. So that is a problem with the system. And, clearly, this is a complicated issue. One part of this issue is what you are trying to deal with today, which is this loophole in criminal background checks. But another part of this issue is how do we deal with people that are mentally ill? How do we get them, some timely evaluation and treatment? If, with the situation with the guy who shot Gabby and murdered 6 of her constituents, if he would have been treated appropriately and put on medication, he would have never done what he did there this day. So while mental illness is a component of this, you can't allow a loophole that you can drive a truck through in Arizona or a small truck here in Oregon, which is the internet.
All right, and I think another point on that is knowing that this bill does really specifically focus on the felon component of it. I do agree, and I think this committee has looked at as to what we can do regarding mental health. One of the things I'm going to be asking our committee to follow up on is what is current law as to an individual who's been assessed by a doctor that maybe they're not fit to continue to drive an automobile. A doctor in the state, as well as a police officer, can actually submit a form to the Department of Motor Vehicles asking them to be retested because they feel that they are not capable of operating a motor vehicle for whatever reasons it may be. It seems to me that if a doctor can do that and actually turn that into to the agency for retesting, there must be some exemptions from the HIPAA, because I also realize HIPAA seems to be an issue that we need to be able to work with, and clearly that's a federal issue that we have to work with our colleagues in Congress. But at the same time, if we are in fact under current state law allowing doctors to report on their patients as to whether they can still drive a vehicle, it seems like they could also do some type of notification to their appropriate authorities regarding mental health issues as it pertains to whether or not they should, at that point, have access to guns.
If I could, Mr. Chair, and because we do have a governor who happens to be a doctor, it's an issue we've been dealing with my father, who's 83 and still thinks he's 20. And but for a doctor to request of DMV, they aren't really disclosing anything that would be HIPAA violation. They're just questioning if he has the motor skills. I mean, is this a really fine line, or I mean, I'm trying to figure out how we get to a mental competency from.
Obviously, vision could be a reason. I think the larger issue here is we have two related issues. As I said in my very brief comments, that this bill or any package of bills by itself is not going to solve the problem of gun violence. This legislature in the last session and in the special session significantly increased our investment in the mental health system, which I think is part of the long-term solution. But to me, that doesn't mean that we should let a glaring loophole remain. This in no way, your bill in no way prevents the legal acquisition of firearms by anybody. It simply says that we want to make sure collectively that while we protect our Second Amendment rights, we ensure that guns, to the best of our ability, don't get into the hands of felons or people who have serious mental challenges. And to me, that's eminently reasonable. I've, through the years, been involved in this debate, and there are packages of bills that I would say are much more aggressive than this. This seems to me, in combination with the investments we've made in the mental health system, a very reasonable step forward that on which it seems to me that we should agree.
All right. Thank you very much, and we're going to proceed with our next panel. Thank you very much for coming forward. Our next panel is with Dan Reed. Dan, if you'll come forward, I believe you have two other panelists to join you. While they're coming up, we're going to go ahead and start loading up on the individuals that will be testifying as public testimony. And so the first panel that we'll have will be Robert Yulee, Gina Pasquilla, and Paul Kemp. You are on deck, and then we'll call the next panel when they come up so we can try to expedite. Setting up your panel, and we'll let you proceed as how you'd like to present.
Sure.
And please remember, and this is for everyone that's giving public testimony, when you do give testimony, we do need to put your name on the record so we can have that as part of the record as to who's speaking. So if anyone wants to know what an individual said. Dan?
Sure. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Dan Reed, and I'm here on behalf of the Oregon members of the National Rifle Association. First off, Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel, along with Mr. Sterrett and Mr. Ramirez.
And
Martinez, I'm sorry.
I just think because of a statement that was made regarding the last panel, Mr. Reed, you don't live here in Oregon, do you?
That is correct. I'm a regional representative for the National Rifle Association. I cover several states, including Hawaii, Oregon, Nevada, and Arizona.
And we appreciate you being here to give us your perspective for your members.
Absolutely. And I'm not here on behalf of myself. I am here on behalf of our members who live here in Oregon. And I'm sure many of them who are in this room today. So
thank you.
Thank you. The NRA is strongly opposed to Senate Bill 1551 as it is ineffective and unenforceable legislation. It's ineffective because criminals simply won't comply. Criminals don't acquire their firearms through legal means. They acquire them through theft, through the black market, or through straw purchasers, all of which are illegal activities. Further, this legislation would not have prevented any of the mass tragedies that we've seen both locally and nationally. One of the previous panelists was Captain Mark Kelly, and I know I'm speaking on behalf of everyone when I say that our heartfelt sympathies go out to Mr. Kelly and his family for the unspeakable evil that they are endured. However, along with that empathy, I must say I'm disappointed that tragedies such as these are being exploited to push an anti-gun agenda. The shooter in that incident, as was mentioned, did undergo and pass a background check, meaning that this legislation would have not had any impact. The same was the case in Aurora, the Washington Navy Yard, and at Virginia Tech. They all passed background checks, so this legislation, again, would not have been effective. We further oppose this legislation because it's not enforceable. How can it be enforced? After an incident? Or perhaps through the harassment of gun owners engaging in lawful activities such as sporting or target shooting? Aside from being ineffective and unenforceable, this law will have a disproportionate impact on law-abiding citizens. As was earlier stated, approximately 99% of the persons who go through a background check are approved. The other 1% then, who are denied, are rarely prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And if we're not prosecuting them to the fullest extent of the law, why are we expanding it? This legislation further impacts gun owners because it does not provide a funding mechanism that will provide for a public awareness campaign to educate persons in Oregon so they're not made criminals overnight for what has long been a legal practice. Nor is there funding attached to this bill to distribute the necessary forms to comply with this requirement. Funding might also be necessary to provide information about how the law works. The law requires checks on transfers, and transfers, absent an exemption, of course, and transfers are defined as gift, sale, or lease. And as Mr. Taylor read the opinion from Ledge Counsel earlier, there could be some interpretation there. As straightforward as it might sound, the line between a loan and a gift could get a little murky. The example he used was a boyfriend who loans a firearm to his girlfriend for self-protection, right? And Mr. Cruz. And there's no time period attached. It's an indefinite amount of time that he's loaning this to her. At what point could that loan become a gift? And at what point could he become a criminal for something that he thought was legal? There's other nuances that I've left unexplored to this bill, aside from the clarification of the language, such as you can give a firearm to your nephew, but you can't give a firearm to your uncle. Or you can give a firearm to your spouse or domestic partner, but not to a live-in partner. In closing, this is ineffective and unenforceable legislation. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next?
For the record, I'm Kevin Sterrett with the Oregon Firearms Federation, and furthermore, for the record, I live in Oregon. I want to thank the governor for pointing out that this law would not prevent a single felon from getting a gun. There are countless technical problems with this bill that Mr. Reed commented on a few of them, but I want to talk about what this bill actually does. The proponents of this bill say that it's not a gun registration bill. That's false. It clearly is a gun registration bill. In fact, there's no way this bill can work without it being a gun registration bill. The proponents say there's nothing in this bill that confiscates firearms. Of course, there was nothing in the registration bills in New York or California that call for confiscation, but that's what they're being used for right now, and that's what this bill will be used for. The proponents say that this is about keeping guns out of the hands of felons, but over 96% of felons who attempt firearms transfers are never prosecuted. So the idea that this is about felons is a joke. According to you, Senator Prozanski, the Oregon State Police performed 263,343 background checks for firearms in 2013. You said that more than 99% were approved and less than 1% were denied. That would be 128,000 unnecessary background checks on law-abiding Oregonians in order to prevent less than 1% of transfers by licensed dealers at the cost of millions to law-abiding Oregonians. Proponents say this is not a registration bill because the state police delete records of gun purchases, but the fact is, we don't know what they delete, and we don't know how many agencies have had access to this information before they delete it, if they actually delete it at all. And if these records really are destroyed, what purpose does it serve to create them? If this is not a registration bill, why are we recording the make, model, caliber, and serial number of every transferred gun? The proponents say this will keep guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. But by definition, domestic abusers are the very people who are exempted from this bill, being that most domestic abusers are spouses or live-in lovers. Finally, Senator Prozanski, you stated that no one has ever had their firearms confiscated in Oregon because of background checks. This is also false. Just ask David Piles, who not only had his guns confiscated, but had his life destroyed as a result of a background check that he actually passed. And I suppose he's just collateral damage in the war on rights. In 2000, we were told we had a gun show loophole. Now we're being told we have a private transfer loophole. If this bill is promised, I promise you we will soon have a nephew loophole. We all know what this bill is about. It's about registration or confiscation. Let's not tell the same lies that were told in New York and California. This bill is about prior restraints on law-abiding and nothing more. I would suggest we put our efforts on something more productive. Thank you.
Jim. Okay. My name is Manuel Martinez, also known as Manny Martinez. I agree with my two predecessors here, but I have another issue here, which is the most important thing. Okay? This bill is a step forward, close to gun control. Period. To disarm the American people. Period. What I'm interested to know, what is behind this? They come here in those dog and pony show and try that they're going to protect people. You're going to protect nobody. I want to know what is behind it. Do you know what is behind it? The problem that we have in this country with this Marxism. Marxism is not coming. Marxism is here. Marxism has been in this country for quite a while. And the politicians allow that because they are ignorant or they are part of the bloc. Don't sell me this. A very powerful man tried to sell me this 50-something years ago. I didn't buy it. Do you think you're going to buy it? Do you think I'm going to buy it now? After pushing 80 years? This is Marxism. Plain and clear. With everything. Communism, socialism, humanism, I heard that too in my native country. They put this talk and punish show saying, hey, we're going to protect you. No, what they did was enslave a country. They destroyed the country the same way that this country is going to be destroyed if we continue in this run. I tell you what you're trying to do, sir. This is what you're selling here. This is what you're selling here. You're not selling protection. You don't care about it, we die or leave. This is what you're selling. This is what they're selling here. bothers me.
No, you continue. You have your time. It's the outburst.
A very powerful man couldn't silence me, put me in chain. But my spirit was never. You can tell me anything you want. I am a free man. I become from a free people, from a free country, from a free family. I get to this country due to liberty, to freedom. This country opened its arm when I needed it, when my life was in jeopardy. For the only reason that they refused to accept communism, that they refused to accept subjugation. You want me to continue? Come on. Tell me I'm wrong. I've been there when you probably start learning how to walk. I was there. I was when I saw the assassinations. The people were killed for free. And you're telling this to the people here, and the governor of this state come here and sit up, say, oh, we need registration. No, my friend. No, my friend. You don't sell this to me. You sell this to the people who do not have self-respect, self-determination, and they are weak, and they have to be subjugated and be dependent on the government. You don't sell that to me, sir. You don't sell this bill to the free men and women of this country. This is a treason. This is an assault to the dream of the founding fathers. They didn't die for this. I can be here for years talking about what happened when you people think to this. You don't know anything. You don't know what freedom is. You don't know when it's a man is taken in the firing squad and take the blood out of their babies because they want to be free. Ask the Hungarians, the Czechoslovakians, the Polish people, the Chinese, the Russians, the Cubans. This is what you're selling. Subjugation. Let's conclude my testimony, and I will take any questions.
Fine. Mr. Reed, since you represent the NRA, because the NRA has taken the position of guns don't kill people, people kill people, can you tell us why the NRA is opposed to background checks? It seems to me that if you're trying to limit individuals who have tendencies such as felons to create crime and harm individuals, why we would not want to filter out those individuals having easy access to guns.
Sorry. Okay. Mr. Chairman, I was having a bit of trouble hearing you, so let me
just state again.
I think I caught most of it, but is it just our general opposition to expanding background checks beyond?
Knowing the position that NRA has taken, the policy of guns don't kill people, people kill people. That seems to me that that's why we would want background checks, to limit those people that have criminal histories, and that's what this bill does. It limits to the access of felons to easy access to guns, where we don't have that right now in private transfers that are not occurring at gun shows. At gun shows that we've had for 13 years, it's been successful in denying individuals who are trying to access guns through that have ineligible because of their criminal history. So why is it that the NRA has taken the position they're opposed to background checks if you're trying to limit people from having access to guns? that are felons.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. As I stated earlier, this is ineffective because criminals will not comply with this.
Well, but the data shows us that in 2012, 2,378 denials that occurred was based on individuals that were felons that were attempting to buy a gun either through a retail outlet or at a gun show. And so those individuals were in fact denied access, or at least the access they tried to get a gun at those venues. And the place that we don't have at this point background checks is the private person-to-person transfers that are not occurring at gun shows. So either in the parking lot, on the internet, and we've actually have seen stuff that have come off some of the internet's listservs where people are either wanting to sell guns without going through a background check or purchase guns without going through a background check.
Mr. Chairman, going back, we're not prosecuting those denials. So what's to stop them if they're initially denied to go somewhere else?
What I do know is that at least in one court that has received information from the unit basically asking whether, when they're doing the background check, as we know, sometimes people are put into the pending. And in the pending investigation, they will be checking to see what is the reason why an individual is not being allowed or could not be allowed to have access based on their criminal history. And so I know at least in one court where the process came through and they said because the judge had placed a prohibition because of their criminal history, their conviction, that they were not to have possessed any firearms during the period of probation. And so that individual I know is being prosecuted in the sense they're being held accountable by the court by a show cause in violation of their probation. So it does seem like at least where the notice is coming to the courts or somehow is getting to the local level. Now, what we heard from the state police is that they are prohibited currently from actually going directly to the law enforcement agencies in the state based on a statute. So it seems to me that it's reasonable to do whatever we can that's reasonable. As a gun owner for 43 years, I don't see why we have the issue of closing this loophole to limit individuals who are criminals that have been denied or deemed ineligible from having easy access to guns. So what does the NRA propose as to checking, making sure people who kill people are not the ones that are getting guns?
Can you repeat that last part one more time, please?
So under the mantra where people kill people, what is the NRA proposing to screen out people that are not fit to have a firearm because of either criminal history or mental health?
Mr. Chairman, let's enforce those existing laws. I mean, currently you're seeing we're early releasing felons all the time, and we're not prosecuting these checks. And so if we're not doing this, what's to deter them? Or when we're releasing back on the streets, why are we doing that if these are the people who are out there committing these crimes?
All right. Any other questions?
I have a question for Mr. Sterrett.
All right, sir, close first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Sterrett, you mentioned make, model, caliber, manufacturer's number, which is in this bill. If this is about background checks, my question is, if a person buys a gun this week and does a background check, then next week they have another background check, maybe next month they have to have another background check, why couldn't we have one background check and that's enough for a period of time?
Well, I certainly would think that would be an improvement. I think the state police would tell you that their concern is that someone's going to commit a crime since the last background check. But, you know, the problem is that the people who I hear from every day are the people who've been hurt and harmed by the background checks, the people who've had their rights delayed or denied. You can be delayed indefinitely by the state police. And as a matter of fact, although under current statute, if I attempt to buy a gun from a dealer and the state police delay me for whatever failures they have at their system, I'm still legally entitled to have the gun. But under this statute, if I wanted to give a hunting rifle to my father-in-law, I'd have to do a background check on him. If I wanted to give it to him for Christmas, of course, I couldn't even do the background check because they're closed. But if he was delayed because of a mistake in the system, he could be delayed forever, and I'm not allowed to transfer the firearm.
Thank you.
Senator Dembrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a kind of related question. as Senator Close mentioned, we're getting a lot of emails in opposition to this law, thousands really. And most of them are asserting, as I think you have, that this is really a form of gun registration. Yet we heard from Ms. Whitfield from the state police that 99% of the requests are purged in 10 days. And so it's hard for me to see how that is any kind of effective registry or would be leading us to an effective registry. And, I think that one of the reasons, is one of the problems with what Senator Close proposed in terms of having a sort of long-term approval is that would require the state police then to keep a record of, the individual requests beyond that 10 days. That, I think, that would take us closer to registration. But, I think that the argument that this is really a form of registration, it's just hard for me to see that it's any more of a form of registration than the system that we've had in place since the late 80s. If you could...
Sure. The system we have in place is gun registration, and this expands gun registration. And in fact, it makes no sense to even pass this law if you're not keeping these records, because then you don't know where the gun has been from person to person. And the fact is... May I finish, please, Senator? The fact is that the law allows the state police to keep these records for 5 years, all right? They have a policy of destroying... Please, they have a policy of, or they claim to have a policy of destroying records in 10 days. But that's an internal policy they created after illegally disclosing the records of David Piles and having his home invaded. The fact is that I have databases that I use to track my members. Those databases are backed up 20, 30 times a day. If, in fact, they're not keeping any of these records, I can't explain why people contact me and say, the police came to my home because there was some kind of disturbance, and they knew what guns I owned. They asked me for a specific revolver. They asked me for a specific handgun. Several years ago, I had coffee with David Yandel, who was Ms. Whitfield's predecessor. And I asked him, I said, you are allowed to keep these records for 5 years. Can you describe the policy for purging these records? Do you purge records every day? Do you purge records every month? How is this done? This is before they enacted the 10-day policy. He couldn't tell me. He had no explanation for how the department actually handles this. And I have no way of knowing these records, that there aren't copies of these records someplace. They aren't shared. We've had people coming across the border from Canada who Canadian officials knew that they owned guns, and these were Americans. So, yes, absolutely is a registration system. It actually moves us closer, and these are the identical arguments that were made when I lived in New York and they started registering guns there. I received a letter from the New York police when I moved to Oregon over 20 years ago saying, we know you have these guns, turn them in or go to jail. This isn't speculation on my part. This is happening right now.
And if I could just... Okay. It's hard for me to see how this is any more of a system of gun registration, this bill that we're contemplating, than the system that's been in place since the late 80s.
It is the same system, and the system that exists is registration. But now you're extending it to a gun that I give to my father-in-law, a person who I've known, many, many years. I can't do that because now I have to humiliate him and conduct a background check on him. And if the state police make a mistake and delay it, I can't give him a rifle in spite of the fact that he is, in fact, my father-in-law.
Nothing else? Mr. Chair, we did hear on the record from the state police what their policy is of purging these after 10 days. I think if there's evidence that that's not happening, of course, I would be interested in seeing that.
If they're purging the records, why are they collecting them?
What they said on the record was that they have part of the duty under the statute is to determine whether or not the weapon is stolen. And they said that they went through that process, and they said that they are, in fact, purging records, which would be, from my understanding, is under their administrative rules within 10 days, if there's no problems. And so we have that testimony. I understand your conspiracist perspective as to what's happening is what you believe is going on as to they're not destroying the records. But, you got to, I guess, unless you can show that they're not doing what they're required by law, then bring it forward so we can address that.
Senator, you can make comments about my conspiracy theories, but the fact is that there's no administrative rule, to my knowledge, that makes them destroy records in 10 days. They announced this policy as an internal policy, and Ms. Whitfield can correct me if I'm wrong, after they illegally disclosed David Kyle's records, and I think we're facing potential legal liability. So it's not a conspiracy theory, because you know what, Senator, I live here, but I'm from New York, and I know what's going on there now. So you can cast those aspersions if you want, but you know what, Senator, it is happening.
Well, what's happened in New York, I don't know. But what I do know here, what I do know is that we've had a background check for since 1989, and currently there's been no demonstration as to some type of registry that's being kept on those guns. And if you have that documentation and data that it is happening, we would love to know that, because then that means our state police are acting outside of the bounds of the law.
If you're collecting the data, writing it down, that is the fundamental nature of a registry. That is the dictionary definition. And all it would take would be to somebody to press one button to duplicate that database, or for this panel to come along and say, we're now changing this is exactly what they did in New York when they started registering rifles. They said it's a civilian body that will keep these records that will never be turned over to the police. Then in the 80s, they turned those records over to the police. And then in the 90s, shortly after I left, the police said, these are all contraband, now turn them in.
All right. Any other questions? Thank you very much for coming forward. Our first panel, I've announced if they'll come forward. And as they're coming forward, our next panel is going to be Representative Ken Thatcher, Casey Runyon, and Dennis Powers. Again, now that we're into the public testimony, please remember that you'll have 2 minutes to make your statements, and please give us your name before you start testifying.
My name is Paul Kemp. I'd like to thank you for having me here today, and thank you for your work on 1551. I'm a gun owner, a hunter, and a supporter of the Second Amendment. I'm also a registered Republican voter. Part of the reason I'm here today is a little over a year ago, my brother-in-law, Steve Forsyth, was murdered at the Clackamas Town Center Mall on December 11th, 2012. That afternoon I was at work. I received a frantic call from my sister, who had just been talking to her husband. And after the shooting occurred, she couldn't reach him. I went to the mall, found her and my niece, and we still were not able to reach Steve, so we were directed to the Clackamas County Sheriff's Training Center. We spent the next 5 hours there. 8:30 that night, the Clackamas County detectives confirmed the worst-case scenario. Steve was, in fact, one of the victims of the shooter. First words out of my sister's mouth were, did he suffer? The detective said he did not suffer. He died instantly, and in fact, he was shot in the back of the head. The absolute worst moment of my life was when we had to tell Alex, Steve's 13-year-old son, that his dad had been shot and killed at the mall that afternoon. My sister and her daughter, Katie, were haunted by the gunshots they heard at the mall that day. I'll be haunted by having to tell Alex that his father was killed. I also had to make all the calls to family and friends and let them know that Steve had been killed, and listen to the reaction on the other end of the line. Personally, I hope none of you are ever in this situation, or otherwise you may be sitting here where I am today. I guess one of the things I've come to realize over the last year and a half is there's a very vocal minority that speaks up against any improvements to the background check laws. And if one-third of homes in the U.S. own guns, then that is a minority. Take those numbers into Oregon, it's still a minority. It's a very vocal minority.
Mr. Kemp, I think your time's up.
All right.
Who's going to go next?
Chairman Prozanski and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here to testify today and for bringing this bill to the table. My name is Jenna Pasalacqua, and I live here in Oregon. I'm from Portland, Oregon. I'm here because my mom, Cindy Ewell, was murdered at the Clackamas Town Center shooting last December 2012. Today, I encourage you to take action to reduce gun violence so that others in our community don't have to go through the loss and the grief that we are still going through every day. My mom was an incredible woman. She loved being outdoors and in nature. She was intelligent, kind, and generous. She was normal. She looked out for others, and she devoted her time to making our community a better place. She should still be here today. The depth of our grief is something that I do not know how to convey. My brother Hunter is 14, and he will now have to grow up without a mother. It's been over a year since the shooting at Clackamas Town Center, and nothing has changed. We have taken no steps forward towards reducing gun violence in our communities. Senate Bill 1551 closes a loophole in our background check system here in Oregon. The fact that this is the strongest bill that we have on the table right now is an embarrassment. Nonetheless, it is a step in the right direction. It is the easiest way to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people without preventing law-abiding citizens from owning a gun for self-defense or sport. Nearly 80% of all Oregon voters and 75% of those who have a gun in their home support this measure. As an elected official, you have a responsibility to represent the citizens that elected you, and Oregonians strongly support this bill to close the loophole in our background check system. Reducing gun violence is a complicated issue, but it is not an excuse for inaction. As I said a year ago in front of this committee, I am committed to this issue, I am committed to speaking out, and I sincerely hope that Oregonians will join me in this effort to reduce gun violence and keep our community safe. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I would welcome any questions that the committee has.
Thank you. Chairman Prozanski, members of the committee, Madam, thank you for having me here this morning. Firstly, I would like to point out a couple of issues that were brought up this morning, and I would like to say my sympathies to Mr. Martinez.
We need your name first.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Robert Ewell. Sorry. My sympathies to Mr. Martinez, who obviously had a very traumatic life in his former country. And I'd also like to point out that passing a background check is not a humiliation. Thank you. So good morning. I am Robert Ewell, board member of Gun Owners for Responsible Ownership. I am a gun owner. I grew up with guns. I grew up hunting. My family has guns. I am also a victim of gun violence. My wife was murdered at Clackamas Town Center a few years ago. Thank you for allowing me to speak this morning. My friends and my daughter have been very eloquent in their presentation, so I will not bore you with any more statistics except to clarify a few points. Firstly, we must ask why we are here this morning, other than the failure of last year's efforts. We are here today because in the year 2000, Oregonians passed a ballot measure to require background checks at gun shows, but neglected to see the workaround or loophole that developed through private sales and through the internet. So what have we learned over the last 13 years? Well, believe it or not, gun possession by high-risk individuals presents a serious threat to public safety. A no-brainer. In a national survey from 13 states with the least restricted firearm purchase and possession laws, of the incarcerated gun offenders who would have been prohibited if their states had stricter laws, nearly 96% who were legally prohibited acquired their guns from a supplier not required to conduct background checks. Wow. That was very difficult for me to speak, and I'm sure it was very difficult for you guys to follow. I apologize for that. So what this means is to say is that the dangerous individuals are not buying guns from gun shows. No, they're not complete idiots. They are going straight to the Craigslist on the internet, and they're buying their guns through internet sites and through unsupervised sources. Time's up. Straightforward. Oregonians have learned from their mistake and generate...
Ms. Ewell, time's up. Thank you very much for coming forward. Our next panel that I called was Representative Thatcher, Casey Runyon, and then I said Dennis Powers. Mr. Powers, we had you down at both as... We just want to make sure that you're on the opposition side. Yes, please come forward. The representative, would you like to go first? not sure what your time frame is if you had other duties.
I do have other duties. Thank you. For the record, I am State Representative Kim Thatcher, representing House District 25, Kaiser, Newburgh, and St. Paul. And I have to tell you, one of the questions that keeps popping up when these laws keep being proposed, and that is, when did criminals get a lobby group? And I say that knowing that nobody in here wants to empower criminals, but those are the ones that are winning when we do things like this. Why is there a belief that if we just have one more law, just one more law, we can prevent more creeps from getting a gun, when in fact they find illegal means to obtain one? They're not going to give one rat's behind if we pass one more law. And let me just paint a scene for you. Something like this could happen. You have a dear friend. She lives alone, hours from you, way out in the country. You find out she's being stalked by her creepy ex-husband. Has she called the police? Oh, yeah. She's called the police. She's got a restraining order and everything, and you're worried about her. She wants a gun for protection now. Can you help her? She's very scared. She's hours away. But your sister lives closer to her. So you tell her, hey, I'll call my sister up. She can get you a gun. That way you'll have something just in case. So you call up your sister. You explain the situation to her. And under this new Oregon law, she says, I have to pick up the background check thing first for your friend so I give the gun to her legally. And that might be okay if the background check can be processed without delay. Or she might run into the same thing that we've heard from so many other Oregonians when they have tried to get a background check, and that is hours, if not days or weeks in waiting. And meanwhile, your friend can't really protect herself. Hopefully nothing will happen. Or this friend gets the gun from your sister anyway because she decided to forego the background check in order to help your friend. This is a life or death situation, and God forbid your friend has to use that gun in self-defense. Now, is your sister a felon because she transferred a gun without a background check? Are you now in trouble with the law because you facilitated an unlawful transfer? Is your friend, who is alive because she had the gun, also now on the wrong side of the law? I just want to say one thing, and that is, when innocent people by law are tripped up into becoming the sinners, the criminals are empowered and become the winners.
Thank you.
Please reject this path.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next?
I will. Chair Prozanski, committee members, Vice Chair Senator Close, Senator Roblin, Senator Cruz, and Senator Denbrow. My name is Casey Runyon. I'm a resident of coastal Douglas County, Senate District 5, House District 9. I'm also the sole challenger against the incumbent Kathy McEwen in her seat for State Representative of House District 9. I am speaking here today to remind you of your limited authority. You have been overreaching in that limited authority for quite some time now. And quite honestly, I am disgusted that you still hold the seat that you were in. Article 6, Clause 3 of the United States Constitution requires that every state official to support the United States Constitution, not just parts of it that you think you like and parts that you don't like. If you prefer to argue the case against the fundamental, God-given inherent liberty of the people's right to bear arms and require lawful citizens to prove innocence in order to exercise it, because the arms in question are not single-shot muskets, please return to your offices at the end of this hearing and mail out your senatorial messages with your feather quill pens on your parchment paper from the office of the printing press. When state officials acquiesce in unconstitutional acts, you are conniving with tyrants against your own people. And if you are conniving with tyrants against your own people so that you can keep your federal funding, then shame on you. For you're becoming so corrupt that you allow yourself to be bribed with money that your grandchildren will have to pay back. And if you connive with tyrants against your own people because you are too cowardly to stand up to them, then you need to resign the office in which you hold and let a real man or a real woman do the job that you were too coward to do. I'm just going to finish with one thing because I do not have enough time to finish my entire testimony. I know how criminals think and act. I know how they think and act because 9 years ago I was placed into custody with about 45 criminals who were of the habitual offender status of my former county of residence in northern Michigan, Ogama County to be specific.
Mr. Runyon, you're out of time.
I'm still not finished.
I appreciate that. The 2 minutes have passed. We've set some rules so everyone can testify.
You have my testimony.
And you have your written testimony that you can hand in, so like we said. Dennis?
Thank you, Senator Prozanski and members of the committee. I'm Dennis Powers. I live in McKenzie Bridge. We virtually have no law enforcement in McKenzie Bridge. I could give you a couple of anecdotes, but I don't have the time. What I do want to say is these figures that I have, I got from the Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, submitted to them by the Regional Justice Information Center. Regarding 2010 was the latest figure that they had put together. Oregon, 168,259 background checks. Denied, 2,393. Arrested, 90 people. We have no idea how many prosecutions were related to these, but the idea that this background check kept people from getting a firearm that wanted to get one does not fly. 2,393 people denied firearms. All you can say with any certainty is that these particular people did not buy the particular firearm that they wanted to buy on that particular day without them being arrested, prosecuted, incarcerated. You have no idea what they did once they left. This is low-hanging fruit, people. We know their names, their addresses, all this information they had to give for that background check, and they were not prosecuted. These people ought to be easy to find. These people ought to be easy to prosecute. And it's not being done. So why are we going through all of this to have all the rest of us have to jump through all these hoops to either access a firearm or to give, buy, sell, whatever to somebody else? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next panel is Nikki Terzi, Chloe Massarillo, and Melissa Earbaum. The next panel after that will be Jim Michelle, Daryl Alderman, and Chris Janik, I believe.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Prozanski. Members of the committee, Nikki Terziev here on behalf of the Oregon Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. Also with me is Chloe Massarello from the Oregon Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, as well as the Oregon Fatality Review, Domestic Violence Fatality Review team, and Melissa Earlbaum from the Clackamas Women's Service Center. We're in support of this bill. We believe that closing this important loophole is going to help save lives. We know from an FBI report that the conviction of a misdemeanor for domestic violence is the second most prevalent reason for a sale to be denied for a firearm, and we believe that the safety of Oregonians here are at risk. I'm going to pass it over so that these folks can just dive in.
Hello, my name is Chloe Massarello. I'm with the Oregon Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, and I serve on the Oregon Domestic Violence Fatality Review team. I'm here today just to share some numbers with you. According to the handout, background checks keep guns out of the hands of abusers. Distributed by the Oregon Alliance to Prevent Gun Violence, 207 Oregonians were killed between the years 2003 and 2010 in domestic violence incidents. This figure is provided by the Oregon Health Authority, and one very important fact about this figure is that it only accounts for intimate partner violence deaths, which is a specific subset of domestic violence. So if we were actually counting domestic violence fatalities during those years, that number would be much higher. The Oregon Coalition for which I work, and the state of Oregon has adopted a much broader definition of domestic violence that includes violence committed by family and household members. So, according to my research through the Oregon Coalition, in the past 2 years alone, 89 Oregonians, women, men, and children were killed during the course of domestic violence incidents. 54 of these individuals, or 61%, died by gunshot.
Yes.
My name is Melissa Earlbaum. I'm a Clackamas County resident and the Executive Director of Clackamas Women's Services, and I'm here to represent domestic and sexual violence victims in the state of Oregon. I've been doing this work for 17 years, and I would love to see us taking the guns out of hands of criminals, but short of that, this bill does help with a loophole. It is a step that will save lives. On October 12th, Peyton, a 5-year-old child, called a family friend to express her dismay that her mother was shot by her estranged ex-husband. The gentleman that shot Jesse Doyle Cabot should not have had a gun, but he did. He had a restraining order against him. I don't know whether or not he would have gotten the gun from some underground criminal organization or whether or not he could have got it easily off of Craigslist, but I do know that this law would prevent him from one of those situations and could have saved her life. Officer Lipke, Oregon City Reserve Officer Lipke, died this past November responding to a house fire that turned out to be a domestic violence abuser who had strangled his girlfriend earlier that day and then shot Officer Lipke in response to that fire, that house fire. These situations happen all the time. They happen far too often. And I'm here to say that I work with victims, domestic violence, sexual assault victims on a daily basis who are being threatened and harmed with guns. Domestic violence homicides, by and large, are committed by guns. And so if this is one step that we can take to close that loophole and save lives so that the 5-year-old Peytons of this state don't have to make that horrible call, don't have to watch their mothers die, I think we should take that step. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Our next panelist, I said, was Jim Daryl Alderman, and Kristen Janke. While they're coming up, the next panel after that will be Wally Schultz, Herman Welch, and Hans Radke. Whoever would like to get started, if you'll give us your name and the testimony, please.
Hi, my name is Daryl Alderman, and thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I'm going to skip to the chase, basically, on the background check system for, we don't want felons to have them. If they're so dangerous, why are they out of jail, first off? I would also like to start into, on the second note, some people, including media and politicians, are comparing the United States to Britain. In doing so, they are doing quick searches on websites like the NRA or Mother Jones to get their facts. They never take the time to make sure that these sites have their facts straight. That is why I go straight to the source of the FBI website for the United States, ONS, which is the UK site for government published statistics, ABS for Australia's site for government published statistics. I also don't compare total numbers. For a small country such as Britain that only has 59.1 million people to a large country like the United States that has 313 million people. Instead, I compared per capita of 100,000. So while, yes, the United States has little less than four more murders per 100,000 people, the United States also has 52 less rapes than Britain per capita and 749 less aggravated assaults than Britain. When I say aggravated assaults, I'm talking about somebody trying to kill you, not trying to fight with you. This means you are 3 times more likely to be raped and 5 times more likely to have somebody try to kill you in Britain. I bring these figures up because gun is not just a killing machine. It's a tool that can be used for bad, yes, but can also be used to defend against such crimes. I am a person that has been raped. When I was younger, I was also somebody tried to, couple group tried to kill me when I was younger. And I would say that anybody that has been raped knows that your life ends at that time, and you start a new life, a struggled life. And you are a completely new person, a shell for some that don't recover from this. And I fear that a lot of us are not looking towards that, and Australia as well, that their crime rate on these areas skyrocketed. Where they used to be better than ours, they're now worse. I would like to share, anybody that would meet with me afterwards, where they can find the data themselves and compare it for themselves instead of relying on somebody saying something.
No, thank you very much. Who'd like to go next?
Thank you, Chairman Prozanski, members of the committee. I appreciate this opportunity to share my testimony today. My name is Chris Janik. I've traveled from Forest Grove today, not quite 100 miles, but pretty far. I've not always been an Oregonian. I grew up in a south suburb of Chicago in the pre-Howard McDonald era. The only people in Chicago that had guns were criminals. Oh, actually, can we set the timer? Sorry. I came to Oregon for college for a better life, and I found it here, thankfully. But skipping forward, I'd like, with limited time, I'd like to talk about the number of denials. We have statistics over 2,000 in each given year. And we talk about the denials in terms of total percentage of background checks performed. What I worry about is the number of denials doesn't provide the full context. My background is data analysis and engineering, and what I look at is what does the number of denials tell you? It simply tells you that a database said, hey, this person's a convicted felon. It doesn't actually tell you how many false positives there are. With the limited number of prosecutions, granted the Oregon State Police can't tell us, but if our numbers track what the federal numbers track, almost nobody's prosecuted. This tells me that either, as a previous person had testified, we're missing a lot of low-hanging fruit. The insinuation is that these are dangerous, violent criminals, and they are pursuing weapons to go continue plying their trade. So we are either missing 2,000 low-hanging fruit, or this is a horrible false hit rates. And what I would ask is, would you accept this error rate when it comes to voting rights or any other right? If you accept this error rate, I congratulate you for being consistent, though I disagree. If you do not accept this error rate for other rights, you should not accept it here either. And I'll speak briefly on the topic of poll results. In the United States, we don't determine rights based on majority rule. This is a concept called tyranny of the majority. It also turns out that polls are very fickle. The National Sports Shooting Foundation did a poll where they asked people the background check question. The initial result was 80% supported it. Then they explained how gun shows work. Support dropped precipitously to 40%. How you ask the question matters very much in the results you get. And thank you.
Thank you. My name is Jim Mischel. I'm from Sheridan. Senator Prozanski, members of the committee. I had several things I want to say, but in a short time I'm going to cut to the chase. First, I've heard several times today, Craigslist, eBay. You cannot buy a gun from them. They do not allow it. It is against their policy. We need to drop that, period. You might be able to slip one on, but within just a few minutes, the people who run those sites will jerk it. Other gun sites, you cannot buy a gun from a gun site. Senator Prozanski, you can put the gun on the gun site and say it's for sale. I can call you down in Florence or Eugene and say, I would like to buy your gun. You are not going to be able to mail that gun to me. I'm going to have to go to an FFL dealer. You're going to have to go to an FFL dealer. It's going to have to be transferred between them. I will have a background check. The only way that works otherwise is if I come to you face-to-face. Now, in light of the face-to-face, one thing I've not heard, and by the way, I'd like to throw some background and throw my sympathies to the victims of other crime. I, too, am a victim of gun crime. My brother was killed. A very good friend of mine, his wife is still going through the ordeal. He was killed at Briggs Camp up out of Roseburg. He was killed underneath an elk pole that he and I hung on the tree. None of those crimes, along with 7 or 8 that I was involved with as a law enforcement officer, these background checks would not have done anything. In almost every single case, the gun was used by somebody who either stole it or legally purchased it. Background check, this private would not have done anything. Time's running low, so I'll skip to the last point. By forcing people into private sale background checks, these felons, the people out here that are buying guns, they know they can't pass a background. They're going to go to a private party. The private party is by himself in his private home, facing a felon who knows he can't buy a firearm. He is going to become the victim of a crime because he knows that this private party is going to call the state police, and that, before that can occur, he wants that gun, he's going to take it. Otherwise, he's going to go to the drug dealer on the corner and buy it where no background check will be done at all, period.
Thank you very much. Our next panel, I said Wally Schultz, Herman Welch, and I believe it was Hans Radke. The following panel will be Gary Weiss, Aaron Aller, and Joseph Clutter.
Excuse me, we're moving slow. I do a hamstring coming out of my dentist's office. Far more dangerous venue.
Who'd like to start? Okay, give us your name, please.
My name is Hans Radke. I live in Lane County in south of Yachts in a very rural area. Senator Prozanski and the rest of the committee, especially my Senator Roblin. I have been a hunter and a gun owner for 45 years. I very strongly support this bill for two reasons. One, I do believe it'll help to keep guns out of some irresponsible people. But the second reason is, 10 years ago, I inherited about 10 guns from my brother, shotguns, rifles, handguns, and so I, in effect, as a family member, gave some of those guns to younger people. I thought very responsible. And then the last one, I sold a totally useless gun, 44 Magnum, stainless steel, 13 inches long, with a telescope on top of it. I sold it to what I thought was very responsible being, and he was. All of my guns have been transferred to responsible people. But the reason I'm testifying is I would feel better if, under this bill, as I understand it, I would have immunity if any guns that I have transferred would end up in something that then I could be sued over. So I think this, for irresponsible people, this is probably the main part of this bill. It keeps people like me from being sued for doing something very legitimate. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair Prozanski and members of the committee, my name is Herman Welch. I live on the Central Oregon coast in Walport, and I was honored to serve on our city council for 12 years, and including 2 terms as mayor of Walport. As a senior, I'm celebrating my 80th birthday this year, and I'm here to speak in support of Bill 1551. I believe it is vital to close this present huge loophole in the Oregon law. I think Oregon seniors deserve to feel more secure from gun violence and to be able to get out, go to shopping centers and movies and feel safe. I've heard about prosecutions under the law, and from my perspective, it isn't really the prosecutions, it's keeping the guns out of the wrong people's hands. And that's exactly what this bill is designed to do, is to again, limit the number of weapons getting in the hands of people. I'm also a handgun owner, and when I bought my gun in California 20 years ago, I underwent a background check, and I thought it was very reasonable and appropriate. Today, some folks think I should man up and defend myself with my handgun, but I think I'm getting a little old for that. And so I am looking for some legislation, and I hope that this can come out of your committee and for the full Senate to vote on this. In the small towns, we vote on all of the issues. We debate it, and we take a vote. And I urge you to take this out of committee to the full Senate. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Senator Prozanski, members of the committee. My name is Wally Schultz. I'm a resident of Florence. I'm appalled by the tragedies that we've seen. However, let me establish my bona fides here, if I may. I'm a certified practicing safety administrator, former member of the American Society of Safety Engineers, former member of the Risk and Insurance Management Society. I have more than 450 accident investigations in my career. So I deal in the facts. Now let's kind of review some of the facts that's searchable data. Not hyperbole, just searchable data. Number one, crime, including gun-related crime, has been going down consistently across the country for 20 years plus. The main reason, safety training. Two, mass murders and rampages are not happening with more frequency, nor such events resulting in higher numbers of deaths. The numbers of these horrific events and death toll has remained relatively level for decades. Now, what's caused this? Media attention has distorted the perception that crime and rampage murders are increasing. SB 1551 is the most poorly crafted and onerous pieces of legislation I have ever seen. This is another solution looking for a phantom problem. I can find no empirical data to support the rationale for enacting this legislation as referenced above. In my concealed handgun training program that I put on, since I'm a nationally certified instructor, both with ASLA, American Society of Law Enforcement Trainers, would not allow me to do the kind of training I would be able to do. So safety in the community would suffer. It would not benefit. It would suffer. We'd be required to run a background check for my students, and then they'd have to run a background check to give me my own guns back. Excuse me? That doesn't make sense. This is not going to increase public safety, senators. It's going to decrease public safety. Thank you for your attention.
Ms. Schultz, you might want to get a hold of that opinion that was read into the record, because some of the statements you made is not accurate based on what the opinion said as to going back and forth with a background check between you and your students. So you might want to check with counsel afterwards. We'll get you a copy, because it sounded like you had a misunderstanding as to when the back check would be required.
I appreciate that, Senator. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so our next panel, I believe, was Gary Weiss, Aaron Auer, and Joseph Carter. And then our next panel after that will be Jen Lynch, David Leslie, and Teresa Reifert.
Mr. Chairman, sometimes it's hard to hear people who are testifying. I missed some testimony back there.
Okay. Gary?
Thank you. My name is Gary Wise. I'm a resident of Monmouth. And good morning to you, Mr. Senator Prozanski, Chair of this committee, and to the members of the committee. I have some objections to this bill, which are legion, but I'm only going to talk about 4 of them. Where's the data to support that this legislation is needed? Where's the data that this bill will solve that need? I would like to know the experiences of the states and review that data. And it is alleged that in 2010, 2,393 people received denials, only 90 were arrested. I would like to know the data on the 2303 to find out whether they were investigated or what happened with them. In regards to family members and background checks, why am I allowed to transfer a firearm without a background check to my niece or nephew or their domestic partners whom I've never met, but not in the reverse? They can't give them back to me if they don't want them. And yet I'm required to do a background check on my neighbor, a Monmouth police officer, and his fellow officers. I'm required to do a background check on Governor Topper or Senator Floyd Prozanski. Why am I required to retain a background check for paperwork for 5 years, but the state police are not required to retain it that long? And also, why am I allowed to ask for the Social Security numbers of the recipient on the form? That should not be allowed. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next?
My name's Aaron Auer. I just wanted to bless you today. God bless you, the panel, and all the people here today. I thought it would just be appropriate to some of the things that we're all supportive of and believe in, just to quote from the general laws and organic law here of Oregon regarding the right to keep and bear arms, and just read it from a historic book here of our state. The Constitution of the State of Oregon, Article 1, verse 27 reads, "The people shall have the right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state, but the military shall be kept in strict subordination to the civil power." That's our state constitution. And then, again, to read from the Second Amendment of the Constitution of the United States of America, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." And I believe that the ultimate authority here for decision and ruling is the Constitution of the nation and of the state of Oregon. And the best way to protect all of our rights. My grandfather fought in the Battle of the Bulge. He was awarded this patch here. It's called the Bloody Bucket. My great-great-uncle died in World War I, Charles Auer, to protect all of our liberties and freedoms. And so I just would like to conclude with saying a well-regulated militia. And to find out, all of us, what is that? Who are they? Where would you go to? Who are the militia? And it's connected to this, a well-regulated militia, not a well-regulated registration. God bless you all. Thank you.
Joseph?
Thank you for taking my testimony, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Joseph Carter. I am a non-affiliated voter from District 3618. I have to come here to testify because my senator is publicly on record saying that she does not represent people like me. I am opposed to this bill because by training and by employment, I have been a software developer and a scientist. And that means I have to follow the data. I have to solve problems by first defining them, understanding them, and making them concrete so that they can be solved. And when you do that with this bill does not solve the problem. It would not have solved any of the horrible tragedies we've heard about this morning. It wouldn't stop others from happening. I have personally been involved with gun incidents, criminals who got them. They usually get them from the same place I could go and get a gun without a background check, even if this bill passes, even if every bill passes. There's a drug dealer just a couple blocks from my apartment in downtown Portland, near Portland State University, who would be happy to sell me a gun. I've got tons of data. I've brought up some examples in written testimony, and others have mentioned it, so I won't go into that here. But it just comes down to, ultimately, if this would work, if this would actually solve the problem, if this would actually really keep guns out of the hands of criminals, seriously actually do that, we should do it. But it's not going to. So therefore, the money that would be spent on expanding this, the money spent anywhere in handling gun control, would be better spent on enforcement, and that's where you should spend it. We've heard about changing the law to make it easier to have the prosecution of people out there, the low-hanging fruit. Do that instead. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. So our next panel, as I said, is Jen Lynch, David Leslie, and Teresa Reifert. As they're coming up, our next panel after that will be Roxanne Ross, Michael Strickland, and Paul Poloski.
Dave Kelsey.
It's here. It's about four more down on the con side. So why don't you go ahead and get started?
Okay. Chair Prozanski and members of the committee, my name is Jen Lynch, and I live in Northeast Portland. I'm here today as a representative of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, which is a group that was founded the day after the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. I'm one of the tens of thousands of moms from all 50 states who woke up to the epidemic of gun violence on that terrible day in December of 2012. In the years since that shooting, I've spent my free time learning about gun safety legislation and organizing moms and lobbying lawmakers like you, not going to yoga and reading for book club. Today's a school day, and I should have been at home this morning making almond butter sandwiches and doing drop-off with my kids, but I'm here with all of you. I'm here today to tell you to close the background check loophole in Oregon. I'm here on behalf of thousands of moms from across Oregon who are unable to juggle a Judiciary Committee hearing with childcare. I'm here because the moms I know are mystified as to why their representatives can't seem to hear that 80% of them, including 75% of the gun-owning moms, want this bill passed. I'm not a gun owner. In addition to my 4-year-old daughter, I have 2-year-old twin boys whose search and destroy skills rival those of any Navy SEAL team. Having a gun in our home, no matter how well secured, isn't a risk that's worth taking from my family. And we don't have a swimming pool either. But to the other moms out there, the moms who are more afraid that a background check bill means creating a registry of gun owners that criminals will use to break into their homes and steal their families' handguns, I beg you to understand the facts of this law as we've heard today. Records of successful gun sales are kept safely and in a manner that respects the buyer's privacy. Background check records are not subject to public disclosure. Law enforcement can only access those records during a criminal investigation. It's time for the excuses to end. It's time to shut down the internet marketplaces that make it so easy for criminals, domestic abusers, and disaffected teenagers to buy a gun for cash. It's time to stop making policy based on imaginary threats of gun confiscation and start making policy based on the real and present danger of unregulated gun sales.
All right, thank you. I called David Leslie. Is Mr. Leslie here? If not, then I'm going to go ahead and ask Alan King, if you're in the room, please come forward to be the third on this panel. Teresa, why don't you go ahead and give us your testimony?
Yes, sir. Well, my name is Teresa Rayford, and thank you, Chair Prozanski and the committee for having us here today. And one of the things that I wanted to say, first of all, is that up in the room upstairs, what everyone keeps saying is that the background checks don't work. Well, they don't work because we have a loophole. That means that the straw purchase deals that are done legally. That's why people aren't locked up for doing them. It's not illegal, and that's what we're here for. So I'll go on with my testimony, and I hope you won't find it disrespectful, but I will wear my hood. In September of 2010, my nephew, Andre Payton, was killed in a shooting that occurred in Portland's Old Town area on Northwest 2nd and Cooch. He was 19 years old and had recently graduated from Grant High School. His death brought back memories of a friend who I knew in my youth who was also gunned down in the city of Portland at the same high school that my nephew graduated from. He was killed over a Fila hat. Andre's murder brought back several friends, all youth, all poor, and all gone too soon, murdered in our community by people with guns. I have testified before about witnessing deadly gun transfers between criminals and the youth in my neighborhood. Buying guns from the trunk of cars is a usual occurrence in the city of Portland. Many of the guns sold and purchased are delivered right into the hands of people who live a life of poverty and sought to buy the guns and weapons as a means of defense or as a way to obtain means to support their family. In the poorest, most underserved neighborhoods around the country, poor and depressed Americans are given a way out of their life of poverty by death, by gun. This is a rule of thumb. The purchase of these weapons for mass suicide of children, domestic violence, and other individuals who chase bullets or use them to kill is a product of our society. We promote the sickness and we support the laws that allow guns to be obtained legally on the streets and used in these ways by those who have no hope. Please do your part as elected leaders and pass Senate Bill 1551, which will require background checks. This will not stop all suicides or youth shootings, though it will help us gain traction in reducing the crime and murders that we hear about on a daily basis in our sweet old part of the good old USA. Pass sensible and healthy gun legislation in our state Do it for the health and the safety of our citizens, and do it now.
Thank you. Mr. King.
Good morning. I'm Alan King. I live in St. Helens, Oregon, Betsy Johnson's District 16. I'm also a gun owner and a former school board chairman in St. Helens. Those two things sort of indicate my interests as far as this is concerned. When we started today, there were about 100 people in the room. If you think of those 100 people as the totality of standing in for the people killed by gun violence, other states that have enacted universal background checks have seen a 38% reduction in the people killed by gun violence. If those 100 people represent the people currently killed in Oregon, the fact that 62 would end up dead is a tragedy and something we need to work on. But we need to celebrate the opportunity to have 38 people alive, and more importantly, their family and friends not scarred. I was recently talking to a gentleman who had a family member killed down in Thurston. That's been years and years. The scar is still there. The wound is still raw. We can, here and now, do something which is constitutional. And here I would like to quote from Justice Anton Scalia's, one of the ultra-right members of the United States Supreme Court, in his writing in District of Columbia versus Heller. To quote Judge Scalia, like most rights, the Second Amendment right is not unlimited. It is not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose. And he says specifically, for example, concealed weapon prohibitions have been upheld under the amendment or state analogs. The court's opinion should not be taken to cast doubt on long-standing prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, or laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places such as schools and government.
Thank you.
We need to quit arguing about people or guns. People who should not have guns kill people.
Thank you very much. Roxanne Ross, Michael Strickland, and Paul Pawlowski. And the next panel after that will be Jim Scott, Jessica Quirls, and Dr. Eric Crowson.
Senator Prozanski and committee, thank you. My name is Roxanne Ross. I'm from Gresham, Oregon. My father, who served in World War II, he told my kids, it was our civic duty to own a gun. That an armed populace keeps our government with a higher integrity. That it was part of the strength of our nation. And an armed populace helped make us less vulnerable to invasion by other countries. But I am so glad that he has not lived to see this day, because he would be so disappointed that we are here doing this today. And there's been a lot of talk about this poll, and this poll does not speak to unintended consequences. My dad used to warn us that we will lose our liberty from within, and we will give it up, and we will give it up on a slippery slope. And he told my kids about the slippery slope of prayer in schools, and how that went down that slippery slope, each step at a time. This is the same slippery slope. And Senator Prozanski, please do not accuse me of having a conspiracy theory mentality, because it's already been done in other states. But this is the slippery slope that leads to confiscation. Once they know the exact weapon by the make and the model and the serial number. In one generation, they'll know every single gun in Oregon. All they have to do is start keeping that information. It's just a small change to change that little part of the law. And that is our slippery slope, and please do not put us on it.
Thank you. Who's next?
Chairman Prozanski, members of the committee, my name is Michael Strickland. Now that my name is known, I fully expect to become a political target of sorts, and I am prepared to defend that in my own media. I'm here to speak against SB 1551. I've changed my original speech here a little bit because several things were addressed earlier. But first off, I want to know how this will be enforced. What is going to physically stop two criminals from making a firearms deal in a dark alley or in their house without a background check? Who will know? If I choose to sell a gun to Roxanne, for example, who I know is a good person, and we choose to not do the background check, how will anybody know that a background check never took place? I can only come up with two ways that this can be enforced. One is to put a cop on every single block, keeping track of every single person. The other way is to run sting operations, which would be sending more police officers into dangerous situations dealing with criminals with guns. You mentioned that you would like to see if OSP is keeping records beyond what they say they're keeping it. I propose that yourself or someone else introduce a bill that allows citizens to look up their own name in the OSP records to see if that data is still in there from a year ago, 4 years ago. That way we can find out the truth about this. I also want to mention that one of the fundamental principles of our legal system is that we are innocent until proven guilty. By requiring a background check, you're making me prove my innocence. For example, I could say, such and such over here is a child molester. Now that person has to prove their innocence when there's no basis for that, me to accuse them of that in the first place. Finally, rather than pass another law, I would say that the way to solve the violence and crime issue is to promote stronger families and good parenting. I will challenge Ceasefire Oregon and Moms Demand Action and other similar groups to promote such things for stronger families that will lead to less crime in the future. Thank you very much, Michael. Paul?
My name is Paul Pulaski, Chair, Senators. This goes back to the old adage, how to boil a frog. We've all heard it. You put the frog in the pot when it's cold, and slowly turn up the heat. Frog won't jump out, you boil the frog. This is just step by step, incrementally. Well, this is registration. You can call it what you want. Rose by any other name, not smell as sweet. The only way to enforce this universal background check law is to know where the firearms have been, who had them. Otherwise, it's just ink on paper. It's unenforceable. No one's going to know if the law has actually been violated. I feel deeply for Mr. Kelly, whose wife was shot by a gentleman who passed a background check. I feel bad for the Clackamas Town Center shooting victims who were killed by a guy who circumvented background checks by stealing a gun. None of the people who have been speaking using their experiences as a reason why we should pass this universal registration bill, none of their situations would have been changed had it been law. It's just, this is emotion, it's theatrics. There's no logic behind it. It gets a little old playing politics. I mean, I have to say I am kind of appalled that you, Chair Prozanski, gave Ceasefire Oregon and Moms Demand Action notice that this hearing was going to be taking place about a week ago.
That's not true.
How did they know They started planning it over a week ago.
Well, I'm not sure
Your
how they
office
got it.
schedules this.
I'm not sure how they got the information. I have not had any contact with either of those groups.
Well,
the only person I had contact with was my administrator, as well as Mr. Kelly, to arrange for his transportation. That's it.
Somebody in your office acted unethically by giving them the heads up
Sir,
when we
sir,
have none.
if you don't have the ability to prove what you're saying, then you're just speculating.
We watched them plan it for a week.
I don't know where they got the information, but to say my staff had some information on this is not true.
Perhaps they can answer it right now.
All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Our next panel is Jim Scott, Jessica Quarles, and Dr. Eric Crowson.
I'll go first. Senator Prozanski and committee, I'm Dr. Jim Scott, here to testify in support of Senate Bill 1551. I'm a family practitioner by trade, Oregon born and raised. I practiced down in Florence for 20 years, followed by another 20-year career focused on healthcare quality and patient safety. Now I serve as the president of the National Physicians Alliance, and that organization has produced this white paper that focuses on gun violence as a public health issue, and we can make copies of that available to the committee. I've been an advocate for sensible gun violence prevention measures for over 40 years. Trained in gun violence as a Boy Scout, and later shattered by the assassinations of 1967 and 68. My first experience in testifying in this legislature focused on gun violence prevention measure was that year, 1968. And we were proposing a bill that was defeated then by the NIA. So here we are over 40 years later. As a physician, I've seen firsthand the ravages of gun violence, senseless tragedies too often preventable. While in Florence, I served as the local medical examiner. My fantasies of Quincy-like investigations weren't realized, but I did see impulsive suicide gestures by local teenagers. Those by overdose, never fatal. Those by firearms, always. One never forgets the tragedy of a family that didn't know it was loaded, or tells you, I didn't know he knew where it was. A public health approach to automobile injury and death has resulted in a 90% reduction of deaths in per vehicle mile over the years. No easy answer to this problem. Multiple factors in that case, and the same thing applies here. This law is an incremental piece. People are right. There are more measures that need to be done, but this is a sensible first step. We know that in states with tighter background check laws, they've seen a substantial reduction in both homicides and suicides.
Thank you. Next.
Chair Prozanski and members of the committee, my name is Jessica Quarles. I'm submitting testimony on behalf of the Oregon Public Health Association in support of SB 1551. OPHA is an affiliate of the American Public Health Association. It has over 500 members spread across every county in the state of Oregon. We are educators, we are doctors, we are nurses, researchers, community leaders, and citizens who are all committed to improving the health of every Oregonian. I'm a nurse and I'm a public health professional. This is my first time testifying, but as a nurse, I've seen the impact of gun violence. So as we discuss this issue today, let's remember that gun safety is not solely about rights and responsibilities, but it's also an important public health issue. The U.S. is unique among high-income countries for its epidemic rate of gun violence. The toll of gun violence in our country is tremendous, and we've heard so today, and so is the societal cost. APHA estimates that gun violence in the U.S. resulted in costs exceeding $170 billion in 2010. Oregon's rate of gun fatalities is slightly higher than the national average, and the statistics are tragic. The Oregon Health Authority reports that we lose more than one Oregonian a day to firearms. And since 2009, firearm fatalities in Oregon have exceeded our traffic fatalities. We can and we must do more. Lessons learned from other public health issues like tobacco and automobile safety show that comprehensive approaches save lives, but loopholes are not good public health. We know that states that have more comprehensive firearm legislations have lower rates of firearm fatalities. We must close the loophole that allows those who are at high risk to themselves, harm to themselves, or harm to others access to firearms without a background check. OPHA supports SB 1551, and while efforts like background checks are often rightly framed as common sense, we believe these actions are also good public health policy. Thank you, Senators, for your service to Oregon, and thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today.
Thank you. Jim?
Chair Prozanski and members of the committee, my name is Eric Crossan. I'm a physician at the Department of Pediatrics at Oregon Health and Science University, and I'm a member of the Oregon Pediatric Society. Today I'd like to offer my strong personal support and the support of the Oregon Pediatric Society for Senate Bill 1551. We feel that this legislation is crucial to protect Oregon's children from gun violence. The greatest threat to kids today is not infection or cancer, but injuries. Firearm-related injuries continue to rank among the top 3 causes of death for U.S. youth. According to CDC data, gun violence accounted for 6,570 deaths among Americans under the age of 24 in 2010 alone, which is an average of 18 gun-related deaths among America's youth every day, a death toll that's on the same magnitude as the 2012 disaster in Newtown, Connecticut. Each of these gun-related deaths among our youth are preventable. As a pediatrician, I believe we need to advocate for every reasonable legislative action that can help make our children safer from gun-related injuries, even if it cannot completely eliminate the threat of gun violence. And I'm not alone in my professional opinion, as universal background checks for gun purchases are endorsed by the American Academy of Pediatrics, the National Physicians Alliance, and the American Medical Association. A law that requires criminal background checks before the transfer of guns between private parties would help to decrease the needless gun violence facing our youth. An investigation performed by the group Mayors Against Illegal Guns found that 1 in 30 buyers on a major online gun exchange would have failed a background check if one had been required. In passing Senate Bill 1551, Oregon would take an important step by limiting access to guns among those who perpetrate violent criminal acts. As a pediatrician, I know firsthand that the death of a child causes an unknowable sadness for that child's family and their community. The tragedy of that loss is intensified in cases of gun-related deaths because we know that such injuries can be prevented. If there are steps we can take to make Oregon safer to any degree for our youth, then I think we need to take those steps. I think this bill is an important step in that direction. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. Our next panel is Roger.
Could I ask a question?
There are no questions during this panel, or you can maybe ask them afterwards. Roger Scheid, John Woods, and Dave Kelsey. Again, as we said, no Q&A during this part. We're trying to get as many people in as we can. While they're coming up, our next panel will be Penny Ultimo, Marge Easley, and Patricia Chandler. Gentlemen, who'd like to go first?
Go ahead, sir. Sure, great. Senator Prozanski. Oh, I'm Roger Seed, by the way. I hope it's the right person. S-E-I-D? Yeah. Oh, sorry. S-E-I-D? Yes. Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure I'm not taking somebody else's spot. Well, Senator Prozanski, senators, my fellow citizens, thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Roger Seed, like I stated, and a little bit about myself. I come from an IT background, worked at both Nike and Intel. I'm a U.S. Marine Reservist with 24 years service, and I'm a small business owner. So it takes a lot for me to come out here because I have to care for the families of my employees, and I'm not being productive. So this is a big deal for me, and I thank you for the opportunity to share. To bottom line it up front, okay, in my research, the August 2000 Journal of American Medical Association said that the Brady Law failed to prevent murders. Okay, that's what we're talking about here. You know, not denying people who don't have guns the access to have guns, but really we want to keep people safe, okay, which is murders. Okay, so this is a Band-Aid solution at best, okay. So if it's not effective, okay, what are we doing here, okay? My other concern is that I also have a secret security clearance. I'm aware of what the NSA has done with data. I'm aware of what the OSP has done with data, and also the IT practices of Cover Oregon. I don't have full faith and confidence in the ability of the state to keep my data secure or to have good data retention policies. I don't know what they are. I could be completely wrong, but I just don't know. And I have a concern about that. And the flip side is, if this is a registration, and if this goes down that line, okay, I come from an immigrant family, and in 1989, there were people in my family that were in China, in Tiananmen Square, okay, and they were being rolled over by tanks. Okay, so, well, nobody actually died, but they were there. Okay, so I'm very, and I've been overseas, and I've seen the effect that not being able to balance the power against the government, against the government's will, has had on the people. And I don't want that to happen here. I think we should invest that money instead on taking care of the real solution, which is healing the people that are hurt. Okay, we should take care of our citizens from a medical perspective and take away the reason why they're acting so dangerously. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. Who's next?
My name is Dave Kelsey. I have a few brief statements I'd like to say to you. There's nothing in this bill that creates a single job except for the government. There's no small businesses that are going to benefit from this. They're all going to be hurt. And I've heard rumors and suggestions about false positives. And the data you have there, less than 1%. I happen to know a lot of friends and family who work with pawn shops in a local area all the way to Portland. They can tell me flat out, if they run 100 a month, 4 out of 10 out of every one of those applications gets the very first question wrong. Are you the original purchaser of this firearm? Their mentality is, I'm in a pawn shop. Of course not. This thing's been bought and paid for a dozen times. So they check, no. It's an automatic failure right there. This is the data you guys don't get to see. How could all your data be correct on your numbers when I have inside information that says they can't even fill out the gun application correctly? So whose businesses are going to be hurt by making these people fail how many times? And you want to prosecute them because they can't think clearly on that simple question? They're not the original purchaser. The original purchaser is like buying a new car. I am the original owner. I'm reselling it to who? And I have to give it away, or give it a gift, or loan or borrow. There's a lot of flaws in your guys' bill, and I've heard some great testimony from Senator Cruz, Senator Close, and I think that this does nothing but hide the true issues here in Oregon, like Cover Oregon. This is a distraction for the public, and I think you're behind it. And I think the money that comes out of New York and California is backing this issue, and you're right in the pocket with them. Thank you.
If you can show that they're not gotten any money from those groups, please do so. Sir.
My name is John Woods. I lived in New York for 55 years. I was employed by Eastman Kodak, and I live in Rochester, New York. Now, to get a pistol permit, before you can buy a pistol, before you can even pick it up in a gun shop, you have to have a background check, an ID photograph, fingerprints, 3 character witness statements taken, a $250 fee, and at least 6 months of average waiting period to finish the paperwork. And all shotguns and rifles have to go through an FFL dealer. With all these checks and requirements, Rochester and New York, a city of 200,000, has had 30 to 35 homicides from firearms every year from 2007 to 2013. If these crimes were solved, the person was usually charged with criminal possession of a firearm, which means the gun was illegal, the gun was stolen, or it wasn't registered. The New York Safety Act was supposed to put an end to the rash of firearms by tightening the universal background checks. In 2013, the same year SAFE was implemented, there were 36 murders in the city of Rochester and an increase of robberies. Of the 354 robberies reported, firearms were involved in 150 of these crimes, which is an increase of 24%. My wife and I lived there for 22 years. We saw the war that went on in what they call the Fatal Crescent. In all that time, there wasn't a single legal gun that we can remember ever being used. And about the Internet, if you read the Gun Control Act of 1968, it says all transfers across state lines must be FFL dealer to FFL dealer, plain and simple. And a FCIS denial has 5 other things for being denied besides felonies, domestic abuse, and mental illness, which includes using a controlled substance, dishonorable discharge, renouncing your citizenship, illegal alien, and not a resident of Oregon. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We're going to have time for 2 more panels. The one I just called should be coming forward. Patricia, Chandler, Penny Okamoto and Marge Easley. Next panel after that, and the last panel will be Frank Marsh, we believe is the last name, Chris Cochran, and Luis Martinez.
Chair Prozanski and members of the Judiciary Committee, thank you very much for this opportunity to testify. My name is Penny Okamoto. I'm the Executive Director of Ceasefire Oregon. Our written testimony has been submitted. So prohibited buyers actually flock to unregulated private marketplace where background checks are not required. In a recent study of a state of prison inmates, 96.1% of offenders who were legally prohibited acquired the gun from a supplier who was not required to conduct a background check. That's from injury prevention right here. I think it's easier to find unregulated gun sellers every day. Since background checks have become law in Oregon, the internet has transformed the marketplace. These internet ads are not transfers to family members, they are sales to strangers. We found about 2,000 active Oregon listings on one site, armslist.com, just last week. Some sellers said outright, quote, "There will be no background check," end quote. Many more lured prohibited buyers are offering FTF or face-to-face transactions, meaning no background check. How many of those guns went to prohibited purchasers, felons, domestic abusers, and the dangerously mentally ill sold by gun owners who voluntarily chose to remain ignorant about the buyer's criminal history? Some people brought up information about people who are mentally ill. We need to do a lot in America to help those who are mentally ill. It's a huge problem in Oregon. It's a huge problem nationally. However, according to Applebaum of Columbia, only about 5% of all the people who shoot other people are actually severely mentally ill. That means if we only focus on the mentally ill, we completely neglect the other 95% of shooters. You've heard all the statistics today in earlier testimony. I won't go into them now. I'd be happy to discuss them with you if you'd like. We've also heard about denials and delays. But I would ask you to remember the people whose lives have been denied or delayed because of a lack of background checks. Please put public safety first. Ceasefire Oregon respectfully urges you to support SB 1551. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's next?
Chair Prozanski, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Marge Easley, and I'm here representing the League of Women Voters of Oregon. You might wonder why the League is particularly interested in this issue. The League is a well-known supporter of citizen rights as guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution, and that is where our history is based on those citizen rights. However, we feel that in SB 1551 in no way infringes on the rights of law-abiding citizens to keep and bear arms as guaranteed by the Second Amendment. The League is also well known in supporting the common good. And in that regard, we as a nation regulate the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, and the products we use. The background check process is not a burdensome regulation. It is a phone call. We are very fortunate in this state that it is a phone call. The League's reputation is strong also in the area of citizen participation and civil discourse. This is where this issue is not one of civil discourse in most cases. In the internet age, we feel that an orchestrated barrage of emails is unfortunately not a totally accurate gauge of support. And those legislators who say that they are getting a barrage of emails, we feel that this is not civil discourse. This is not based on fact. This is not based on a body of evidence. We feel that the evidence supports the fact that background checks do work, and they do save lives. And that ends my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Prozanski and members of the Senate Judiciary, thank you for allowing me to speak today in support of Senate Bill 1551. My name is Patricia Chandler, and from 67 to 70 I lived on an air base
in Japan while my husband took care of wounded soldiers. I raised a family of 3, and I have 9 grandchildren, and I speak for them. I was privileged to work with veterans who suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder and their family for 20 years. When I was in Japan, I would visit the wounded soldiers. I know what it looks like to have been wounded by a gun. I know what it looks like to have a young man who's going to go home and see his mother without having a face. Oh my, I have a lot of passion about this issue. I'm not representing any group. I'm just representing my heart from what I've experienced. My veterans when they told me they were suicidal, I said, will you give your gun to a friend? To a one, they said, yes, thank you, I will feel safer. When my veterans told me they feared because they were impulsive, that they hurt their family members, I said, will you give up your weapons until you feel safe? They said yes. None of them said no. Background checks are simple, they're logical, it's an important step. I've worked with people who had family members who were suicidal. They didn't know that. A young man who got an F in a chemistry class found a gun and killed himself because he was afraid his father would be mad at him. These are impulsive gestures. Anything that would build more time into the system will save lives. And I can't remember who it said. It could have been Einstein. Remember your humanity and forget all the rest. In the state of Missouri in 2007, they repealed background checks, and their death from guns went up 25%.
Your time's up.
Thank you
very much. And like I said, our last panel for today will be Frank Marsh, Chris Proctorlin, and Louis Martinez. We'd like to get started. We're over.
Sure. Senator Prozanski, members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, my name is Chris Cochran. I am from Gresham, Oregon. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak and voice my opinion on the proposed Senate Bill 1551. I'm strongly opposed to this bill for several reasons. One, criminals are criminals for a reason. They do not follow the law. I'm sure you have heard this 100 times by now, but I can repeat it for you. Laws only affect those who follow the law. Even if you did pass the proposed law, what would be the outcome of someone who attempted to buy a firearm illegally? Out of the over 2,300 people who were denied a firearm due to a failed background check, how many were pursued and prosecuted? If a criminal or a felon want to get a gun and they have malicious intent, they're going to get the gun anyway. Here's a great example of this. And another person brought this up earlier. This last October, my sister-in-law, Jessie, she was shot in the head in front of her 2 young daughters, Peyton and Paige. You may remember hearing about this on the news when the Amber Alert was issued when he escaped with Jessie's 3-year-old daughter. He was caught later that night in front of my wife and I's apartment. He was in possession of 4 handguns and a bulletproof vest. Now, he was already a felon and was not allowed to own a gun. He didn't get his gun by buying from a friend, from Craigslist, from Armslist, or anything of the sorts. A background check would not have stopped him from getting these guns. A background check would not have stopped him from breaking into her apartment and shooting her. A background check would not have stopped him from kidnapping Jessie's daughter. I welcome you to try to tell me how a background check would have stopped somebody like Josh from getting a gun. You cannot provide a valid excuse for why background checks on private sales will stop or prevent a criminal in any way. Because if they are hell-bent on doing it, they will find a way to do it, period. Now, Senator Prozanski, or any other member of this committee, I encourage you to present me with a valid reason as to how universal background checks would have prevented my sister-in-law's murder. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's next? Louis Martinez. Why are we here on this bill? We've heard testimony that this bill would not have stopped the Clackamas Town shooting. It would not have stopped Kip Kinkle. It would not have stopped the Connecticut shooting.
it would not have stopped Captain Kelly's wife's shooting. He admitted that, and everyone here has admitted that. No one has brought any testimony, has provided any actual empirical evidence that the wording of the bill proposed today would stop any of these acts that have brought us all here today. So why are we here on this bill? It doesn't make sense. There is a loophole, and the loophole is the elephant loophole in the room. And that is that over 1,000 individuals attempted to purchase a firearm each year in the state of Oregon and were denied, presumably because it was illegal for them to purchase it. So instead of creating more lists for law-abiding citizens to walk through, why not close that loophole first? I live in Salem. I'm a Capitol junkie. I like to walk through the Capitol and see what's going on. I'm a lawyer. I get it. I'm into it. I've been doing this for a long time. And I remember when Senator Prozanski was in the House committee, and I believe at the time the chair was Mr. Mannix, if my memory serves correct. And since then, this issue keeps coming up. Let's put these people in jail. And Mr. Chair incredulously responds today as if, why, that's a great idea. Why don't we do that? And yet that's not before us. So why? This is a gun registration bill. The Oregon Administrative Rules only has the statement that the state police keep the records for 5 years. It's about registration. If we want to solve something, then let's close the hugest loophole here and put criminals in jail for trying to buy a gun, not innocent people. Thank you. And Frank?
Yes. My name is Frank Martin, not Frank Marsh, and there's a Mike Marsh on the list, so I apologize for any confusion. My name is Frank Martin, and I thank you today, Senator Prozanski and Senator Close and the rest of the committee. I'm an Air Force veteran of 23 years before I returned to Oregon. I kept my Oregon residency the whole time I was in the United States Air Force. I live in Portland, and I'm going to just save time. I agree with the comments of Kevin Starr, the Oregon Firearms Federation, and the previous NRA, and all the other supporters who spoke before, people against this bill before me. Although there is one issue in this Senate bill that I have not heard brought up. You kindly put in the bill requirements where it does not apply to family members. People like a person's spouse, a son, a sibling, grandparents, grandchild, nieces and nephew, domestic partner. Unfortunately, that doesn't apply to me. I've never been married. I'm single. I don't have children. Is the state mandating that I must have get married and have children suddenly so I can transfer my firearms if I should die? They have to go through a background check to get my willed weapons? That's a very good question to me. And I took exception when I listened to Ms. Winfield talk about the destruction of records of these background checks. Nowhere in this bill does it propose is a firearm transfer unit going to suddenly, firearm transfer unit, are you going to fund it for any more increased background checks? What forms are going to be used? Nothing is said. But under the Brady Handgun Control Violence Prevention Act of 1993, when you buy a new firearm going through the background check, use an ATF Form 4473. Yes, okay, let's say the Oregon Transfer Unit destroys that record after 10 days if I get approved. But the record, the 4473, is on file with the dealer for over 20 years. Thank you, and I give up the balance of my time.
All right, thank you very much. So this is going to conclude our hearing for today. I want to just take the moment and close and say thank you to all of those who have come forward to participate. I do understand this is an extremely emotional issue for many people on both sides of the issue. I want to thank you for showing as much proper restraint as you did. I do believe the number of people that we had testify, we think, is 42, if we're correct. 22 in opposition and 20 in support of the bill. So again, thank you very much for being part of the process, and we're adjourned.